Welcome back to the last transmission, where the signal has found you once again, and where curiosity brings us together to explore the hidden science, unanswered questions, and extraordinary possibilities that make our world far stranger and more beautiful than it first appears. I am truly glad you are here, because every documentary becomes more meaningful when it is shared with people who still believe there is something new waiting to be discovered. Before we begin, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who would enjoy following the mystery with us, because every like and every share helps the signal travel farther and brings another curious mind into our growing community. If quantum coherence truly exists and functions within fungal networks, then one of the most important scientific discoveries of our time may not be waiting inside a particle accelerator or orbiting a distant star, because it may already be moving through the soil beneath our feet. This would not be a narrow finding confined to one corner of mycology, but a discovery capable of pulling at assumptions across biology, ecology, computer science, and even the philosophy of mind, because it would suggest that living systems have been using the laws of quantum mechanics in ways that human technology is only beginning to imitate. By 2025, evidence from quantum biology, fungal electrical signaling, and biological computing had begun converging faster than most people realized. Over the next few minutes, we are going to follow the full spectrum of those implications, beginning with the hidden networks beneath forests and gardens, moving into laboratories where researchers are growing mushroom-based computer components, and finally arriving at the genuinely unsettling question of whether intelligence, memory, and perhaps even the earliest ingredients of consciousness can exist without a brain. This is a story that begins in the soil, but it ends by asking whether humanity has spent its entire existence surrounded by forms of intelligence it never learned how to recognize. Beneath nearly every forest, grassland, and garden on Earth, there is a hidden biological architecture made from mycelium, the vegetative body of fungi, which consists of branching, thread-like cells called hyphae. These microscopic filaments weave through the soil, join with one another, and frequently connect to the roots of plants, creating networks that can extend far beyond the fruiting bodies we recognize as mushrooms. Approximately 90% of all land plants form mycorrhizal associations with fungi, which means that almost every tree you have ever walked past may have been connected to a biological network hidden beneath the surface, exchanging materials through structures most people never see and rarely imagine. In 1997, Dr. Suzanne Simard, then a young forest ecologist, published a landmark paper in Nature, demonstrating that trees can transfer carbon to one another through fungal connections. That same year, Nature coined the term Wood Wide Web to describe what Simard had uncovered. Trees were no longer being viewed only as passive neighbors competing for light, because they appeared capable of exchanging resources, moving nutrients toward younger saplings, and potentially transmitting chemical information associated with stress and environmental threats. Simard, now a professor of forest ecology at the University of British Columbia, spent decades expanding this research through work that included the Mother Tree Project, established in 2015. Her 2021 book, Finding the Mother Tree, carried the idea far beyond scientific journals and into the public imagination. The image was emotionally irresistible because, beneath the forest floor, older trees seemed to be connected to younger ones through living fungal threads, creating something that looked almost like cooperation on the scale of an ecosystem. Although the Wood Wide Web concept has not gone unchallenged, and that challenge matters. In 2023, a citation review published in Nature Ecology and Evolution argued that some of the most popular claims about mycorrhizal networks had been overstated relative to the available field data. The idea that older trees preferentially support younger ones, or that these underground networks are universally beneficial, may be more complicated than the story people wanted to believe. Evolutionary biologist Toby Keers of Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam expressed the concern directly when she said, "We see harmony because we want to see harmony." Her warning was that the cooperative forest narrative might obscure a system that also contains competition, manipulation, and conflicting biological interests. Some scientists have also emphasized that common mycorrhizal networks are not definitively proven to be the mechanism behind every observed transfer of resources. Soil microbes, diffusion through water, and direct contact between roots may also explain some of what researchers detect. That skepticism does not erase the underground network, but instead makes the mystery more honest by separating what researchers can demonstrate from what human beings may simply want the forest to mean. Even the strongest critics do not dispute that fungal networks exist, that they are ecologically significant, or that signals and materials move through fungal tissue. The debate concerns degree, mechanism, and interpretation, asking whether humans have understood the network correctly rather than whether the network exists at all. Within that network, something happens that makes the familiar image of a forest begin to feel strange, because fungi do not merely move nutrients and chemical compounds through their tissue, but also transmit electrical signals. A comprehensive review published in January 2025 by the Federation of European Microbiological Societies described electrical signaling in fungi as a largely underexplored field. These currents are extremely small, often measured in microamps per square centimeter, with voltages in the nanovolt to microvolt range, far below the millivolt signals associated with animal neurons. Although these electrical events operate at an almost unimaginably small scale, the signals are real, measurable, and patterned in ways researchers can repeatedly observe. Dr. Andrew Adamatsky, who leads the Unconventional Computing Lab at the University of the West of England in Bristol, has been at the forefront of this research. His team was the first to report spiking activity in fungi measured through microelectrodes, and as he explained, mushrooms produce action, potential-like spikes resembling the electrical activity generated by neurons, allowing his laboratory to become the first to use those measurements in the development of fungal computing and fungal electronics. In September 2025, researchers introduced a standardized method for detecting these signals through printed circuit boards with embedded differential electrodes, a Faraday cage designed to minimize interference, and short-time Fourier transform analysis used to identify meaningful patterns inside the electrical noise. The technical details matter because they mark a change in the field, as researchers are no longer merely placing electrodes into fungal tissue and wondering whether the fluctuations mean anything, but are instead building repeatable systems designed to listen with greater precision and distinguish genuine biological patterns from environmental noise. For hundreds of millions of years, electrical activity may have been moving through fungal networks without any animal, human, or machine being able to detect it. And only now have our instruments become sensitive enough to hear even a fragment of what was happening, revealing patterns that appear to be more complex than anyone expected. That brings us to quantum coherence in fungal networks, where the story crosses a threshold that would have sounded like science fiction only a few decades ago. Quantum biology began gaining wider credibility in 2007 when Graham Fleming's team published landmark evidence suggesting that quantum coherence plays a role in photosynthesis. In plants, photosynthetic systems appear to use quantum effects to transfer energy with extraordinary efficiency, approaching 100% under certain conditions. The finding was remarkable because quantum coherence was believed to be too fragile to survive inside a living organism, where warmth, moisture, vibration, and constant molecular collisions should cause coherent quantum states to collapse almost immediately. The physics seemed to say that biology was too noisy for quantum behavior to remain useful, yet the data suggested that life had found a way to preserve something physics had told us should disappear. Long before those experiments, Erwin Schrödinger had proposed in his 1944 book, What is Life?, that quantum mechanics might help explain the stability of living systems and their cellular processes, although for decades that suggestion remained closer to philosophy than established biological mechanism. Modern research has since explored how decoherence times can extend from approximately 10 to the negative 13th seconds toward physiologically meaningful timescales beyond 10 to the negative 9th seconds. That difference spans 4 orders of magnitude, and it separates a quantum effect that disappears too quickly to matter from one that might influence what a living cell actually does. The deeper realization is that life may have been exploiting quantum mechanics for billions of years before a human being ever created a word for it. The question then is what this could mean for fungi, because studies have suggested that fungal cells may use quantum coherence to transport energy with remarkable efficiency. Other research has indicated that certain fungal enzymes involved in breaking down plant material rely on quantum tunneling, a process in which particles cross energy barriers that classical physics says they should not be able to pass. Researchers are also exploring whether coherence could optimize electron transfer during redox reactions involved in nutrient uptake. If that possibility is correct, quantum coherence might help explain why mycorrhizal fungi can maintain efficient nutrient exchange during drought, in poor soil, and under other forms of environmental stress where classical biochemical explanations appear incomplete. The theory, sometimes described as quantum mycelium, remains speculative, and that must be stated clearly because we do not yet possess direct, replicable measurements demonstrating functional quantum coherence across living fungal networks in the way required for definitive proof. What we have instead is a convergence of clues, each one weakening the old assumption that quantum behavior cannot remain biologically useful. Photosynthetic systems appear to exploit coherence. Enzymes can use quantum tunneling, and magnetoreception in birds may depend on quantum effects, which means that biological structures once assumed to be too warm and chaotic for quantum behavior repeatedly reveal mechanisms that classical models alone struggle to explain. Quantum effects may therefore be more than merely possible inside living systems, because they could be woven throughout biology in ways science has only recently developed the tools to investigate. If fungal networks also use them, then the implications would spread through several fields at once, beginning with ecology and forest management, where Simard's work has already influenced forestry practices in some regions by encouraging greater attention to old-growth trees and the fungal connections surrounding them. If quantum coherence contributes to nutrient transfer, stress response, or electrical signaling within those systems, then disturbing a mycelial network may be more consequential than cutting through a passive web of fungal tissue, because it could mean damaging a system whose organization and efficiency we have barely begun to perceive. The more researchers learn about underground fungal connections, the more they can investigate how forests respond to drought, pest attacks, nutrient scarcity, and environmental disruption. That knowledge could influence woodland restoration, the cultivation of more resilient forests, and the wider response to climate change. This knowledge also introduces a more uncomfortable possibility, because humanity may be capable of destroying complex biological systems before it understands what those systems are doing. A forest can be cleared in only a matter of days, while its soil can be compacted, heated, poisoned, or stripped away, even though the electrical and chemical relationships beneath it may have taken centuries to develop and still remain invisible to the people making decisions above the ground. The second implication leads towards something that sounds even more improbable, because researchers are no longer studying fungi only to understand forests, but are now studying them as living materials from which entirely new kinds of computers might be built. Adamatsky first proposed fungi as computing devices in a 2018 paper titled Towards Fungal Computer, and by 2020 his team had demonstrated Boolean logic gates in fungal colonies, followed in 2022 by the publication of Mining Logical Circuits in Fungi in Nature Scientific Reports. The concept is elegant in its simplicity, with electrical spikes carrying information, the branching mycelial network performing computation, and mushrooms or other fungal structures providing a physical interface through which the system can be measured. The pace of development after that point was startling, and in October 2025, a team at Ohio State University led by John LaRocco published research on shiitake mushroom-based memristors. The researchers demonstrated that fungal memristors could be grown, trained, dehydrated, preserved, and later used while retaining functionality at frequencies up to 5.85 kHz, with an accuracy of approximately 90% plus or minus 1%. Fungi are a compelling physical match for neuromorphic computing because their networks can transmit electrical signals, adapt under stress, and reroute activity around damage. In that sense, mycelium behaves less like a rigid electronic circuit and more like living neural tissue searching for another path. One detail carries the idea far beyond the laboratory, because shiitake has exhibited radiation resistance, suggesting that fungal computing materials could have potential aerospace applications, and that mushroom-based computing systems might eventually function in environments beyond Earth. In August 2025, Another team introduced mycelium-based reservoir computing chips, a form of neuromorphic substrate capable of transforming input signals into complex, high-dimensional patterns useful for machine learning tasks. The chips were created through what the researchers called a design-grow-compute workflow, with as many as 16 spatially distinct reservoir regions formed on a single biological chip, while a single growth cycle using existing mushroom farming infrastructure could potentially produce more than 3 million chips. The contrast is extraordinary because conventional silicon fabrication requires enormous financial investment, specialized facilities, extreme temperatures, and industrial processes that leave behind difficult environmental costs, while mycelium-based components can be grown under ambient conditions through infrastructure that already exists and can be composted after their useful life ends. Humanity may eventually grow computing systems rather than manufacture them, cultivating machines that could adapt around damage, survive radiation, perform machine learning operations, and then return harmlessly to the soil after their work is finished. If quantum coherence contributes to the signal processing complexity of fungal networks, then understanding it would not be an obscure academic achievement. It could become part of an entirely new technological paradigm, one in which our most advanced machines are cultivated from living structures that solved resilience, efficiency, and self-organization long before humans appeared. But the third implication moves beyond forests and technology into territory that is far more difficult to discuss, because it touches the boundary between biological behavior and mind. Up to this point, fungi can still be understood as extraordinary biological machines that transport nutrients, generate electrical signals, adapt their growth, and may even perform computation through the physical structure of their networks. Although none of those abilities by themselves prove intelligence or experience, because a calculator can process information, and a thermostat can respond to change without either possessing consciousness. The pressure begins to build when an organism does more than react to the present, because its future behavior appears to be shaped by something that happened in the past. Dr. Yu Fukasawa at Tohoku University in Japan helped trigger a serious scientific conversation through experiments suggesting that fungal mycelium exhibits behaviors commonly associated with cognition. Fungi can retain the effects of stressful experiences for as long as 12 hours, while a mycelium growing through a wood block can preserve information about the relative position of another block used as bait. When the original block is removed and transferred into fresh soil, the mycelium tends to re-emerge from the side where the bait had previously been located. Even after the environment has changed and the original cue has disappeared, the organism behaves as though some trace of the earlier arrangement remains inside it. That is more difficult to dismiss as a simple reflex, because the mycelium is not merely responding to what is present, but allowing its future growth to be influenced by something that is no longer there. It has no brain, no neurons, and no centralized nervous system, yet its behavior suggests that the past has left a physical imprint capable of shaping what it does next. And that possibility becomes even more personal when we consider how a fungal colony develops. Every young colony assumes a unique form because the timing and location of each new branch differ as the mycelium grows. This uniqueness is not simply a matter of genetics, because identical clones produced from the same parent fungus can still create networks with different shapes. Each mycelium becomes like a snowflake, taking form at one place and one moment in the universe, shaped by a sequence of encounters that will never be repeated in exactly the same way. A fungal colony belongs to a vast interconnected biological system, yet its own development remains singular. It encounters resistance, redirects itself around obstacles, retains the effects of stress, and grows into a structure unlike any other. It does not possess a face that can show fear, eyes that can follow us, or a voice capable of describing what has happened to it. For most of human history, that absence was enough for us to assume that nothing meaningful could be taking place within it. The emotional pressure deepens when researchers expose mycelium to anesthesia, because when fungal tissue encounters chloroform vapor, the frequency and amplitude of its electrical spikes decline until, in many cases, measurable activity above the background noise nearly disappears, after which the electrical patterns return toward their earlier levels when the chloroform is removed. This does not prove that fungi lose and regain consciousness in the way a human or animal does. The electrical response may have a completely different biological explanation, and the evidence does not justify claiming that a mycelium experiences sleep, pain, or awareness. Even with those cautions, the resemblance is difficult to ignore, because a substance that suppresses activity associated with awareness in animals also suppresses patterned electrical activity in fungal tissue. And when that substance is removed, the activity returns. The unsettling part is not that this proves fungi are conscious, but that we do not yet know what the electrical silence means or whether we possess the concepts necessary to interpret it. Once memory, individuality, adaptation, electrical signaling, and anesthesia response appear within the same organism, each result becomes harder to treat as an isolated curiosity. Together, they begin pressing against the boundary humans have traditionally drawn between a system that merely functions and a living system that, in some unfamiliar sense, may register what happens to it. None of this establishes subjective experience, but it does challenge the assumption that memory, problem-solving, individuality, and adaptive behavior require a brain. Researchers are finding that fungi can perform tasks once believed to belong exclusively to organisms with nervous systems, and that raises a question that becomes more uncomfortable the longer we consider it. If an organism can retain the past, navigate through space, adapt around damage, and alter its future behavior without a single neuron, what exactly do we mean when we call something intelligent? This question connects directly to broader work on quantum coherence and consciousness, including research published in October 2025 that explored how spintronic and memristive effects, combined with unusual conditions inside neural structures, could allow quantum coherence to emerge spontaneously in populations of microtubules. Under that theory, the spontaneous emergence of coherence would be the necessary and sufficient condition for the generation of what researchers describe as microconsciousness. If quantum coherence exists in fungal networks, and if related forms of coherence contribute to consciousness in neural systems, then the conventional boundary around mind begins to weaken. Under that possibility, consciousness might not depend exclusively on a brain, but could emerge wherever matter becomes organized into a system capable of sustaining sufficiently complex coherence, memory, feedback, and self-directed adaptation. Although that possibility remains speculative and the evidence is far from complete, scientific revolutions often begin when observations continue accumulating outside the categories created to contain them. For centuries, humans defined intelligence through resemblance to ourselves, looking for eyes, faces, voices, tools, language, and centralized brains. And when another organism lacked those features, we assumed that whatever it was doing belonged to a lower category of life, because we were never searching only for intelligence and were instead searching for reflections of ourselves. Fungi may force us to confront the possibility that this was the wrong standard from the beginning and to ask how many forms of intelligence could exist around us unnoticed, simply because they do not announce themselves in a language the human mind was prepared to recognize. That question returns us to where this story began, because only 20 years ago, quantum biology remained close to the scientific fringe. Fungal computing was still a thought experiment, and the Wood Wide Web was a metaphor that many professional ecologists regarded with skepticism. By 2025, researchers had developed standardized methods for measuring fungal electrical activity, created working mushroom-based computing components with approximately 90% accuracy, and documented memory, spatial navigation, stress response, and anesthesia-related changes in organisms without a single neuron. At the same time, theoretical and experimental work across quantum biology continued suggesting that coherence might help connect energy transfer, computation, and biological organization in ways that classical explanations alone cannot fully capture. The implications reach into nearly everything: the way we manage forests, the way we design computers, the way we define intelligence, the way we investigate consciousness, and even the way we imagine machines that might one day travel beyond Earth. The deepest implication, however, may not be what fungi could allow humanity to build, but what they force us to reconsider about ourselves and the boundaries we have placed around intelligence. When Suzanne Simard described resource transfer through fungal connections in 1997, she was revealing a system that had already existed for hundreds of millions of years. The system did not begin when science discovered it, and it did not require a scientific name in order to function. When Andrew Adamatsky placed microelectrodes into mycelium and detected spikes resembling neural activity, he was not creating a signal. He was listening to activity that may have been moving through fungal tissue since long before animals evolved nervous systems. Humanity entered this story extraordinarily late, carrying a brain shaped by a very different kind of life and eventually developing language, mathematics, laboratories, and machines. Yet when we looked back into the living world, we assumed that intelligence would announce itself in a form we could recognize. We searched for eyes that could look back at us, voices that could answer us, tools that resembled our own, and brains organized like the one inside the human skull. When life failed to resemble us, we placed it beneath us. Even though below the forest we crossed, something ancient was already sensing change, preserving information, redirecting itself around damage, exchanging signals, and building vast networks in complete darkness. Think of every forest you have ever entered, and perhaps you were a child the first time, following someone you loved beneath trees that seemed impossibly tall. You may remember the sound of leaves moving overhead, the cold air beneath the canopy, the smell of damp soil, or the way sunlight broke apart as it passed through the branches. At the time, the ground may have seemed silent, even though beneath your feet, an ancient network was already carrying information through the dark. It was preserving the effects of drought, injury, changing seasons, fallen trees, and generations of life that had come and gone before you were born. While you listened to birds calling between the branches, another system was active below the surface, moving through microscopic threads that could not be seen, heard, or felt. It was not waiting for humanity to discover it, nor was it incomplete before we gave it a name, because it was already carrying information, responding to the world above it, preserving traces of what had happened, and rebuilding itself around every wound in the soil. Some of the forests we remember are gone now, with their trees cut down, their soil torn open, and networks shaped across decades or centuries erased without anyone knowing what information they carried. Those places remain in photographs, in memories, or in the minds of people who once stood beneath them, but the living architecture below those trees may never return in the same form. We may never know what was lost beneath those places because humanity learned how to destroy these systems long before it learned how to listen. That is where this discovery becomes more than a scientific curiosity, because a forest can be cleared in only a matter of days. Soil can be stripped away, compacted, heated, or poisoned, and fungal networks shaped across generations can vanish before we ever learn what forms of information, memory, or biological organization disappeared with them. There is something profoundly painful about realizing that the living world may contain forms of complexity we are only beginning to detect, while our power to erase them is already complete. We may spend decades asking whether a fungal network can remember, whether it can compute, or whether anything resembling experience can emerge inside it, only to discover that the system we hoped to understand no longer exists. Perhaps that is one of the quiet tragedies of discovery, because science does not always reveal something new, and may instead reveal what was always beside us only after we have already damaged it, ignored it, or allowed it to disappear. We spent centuries believing that silence meant absence, that stillness meant simplicity, and that anything without a face, a voice, or a brain could not possess a history of its own. Perhaps the living world was never silent at all, and we were simply surrounded by languages we had not yet learned to hear. Science at its best does more than reveal new mechanisms, because it teaches humility by showing us that reality was never limited to the categories we created for it. If quantum coherence in fungal networks is eventually confirmed, the discovery will not mean that fungi became sophisticated when human beings connected electrodes to them. It will mean that our instruments finally became sensitive enough to reveal a small part of what had always been there. The most profound technologies and the deepest forms of intelligence may not be things humanity invents, but things nature developed long before us through structures that do not think as we think, do not speak as we speak, and do not need to resemble us in order to possess complexity, memory, or meaning. The final realization may not be that fungi are more human than we imagined, but that life has always been far stranger, deeper, and more capable than the human definition of intelligence allowed. So rather than discovering a new kind of mind, we may be discovering that mind was never confined to the forms we were willing to recognize. Perhaps every forest we lost carried an ancient memory of lives, wounds, seasons, and connections that vanished before humanity ever learned how to listen. And once that truth settles inside you, the silence beneath the trees can never feel empty again, because somewhere below your feet, life may still be holding the memory of everything we were too late to understand and too careless to protect.